So we're talking about Mipam Gyatsho is talking about the path of release. And he speaks about manifesting the noumenal mind, the fundamental mind, in terms that we're used to from the Guhya Samaja Tantra. In that let's see, he speaks of the enlightened clear light exemplified by space devoid of the three polluting conditions. And Khetsun Sangpo identifies the three polluting conditions as moonlight, sunlight, and darkness. And then Mipam Gyatsho himself as I remember down below, refers to the three polluting conditions. I wanted to make clear of that it isn't just Khetsun Sangpo, well, I don't know, so I need to use the word thus, just identifying the three polluting conditions as moonlight, sunlight, and darkness. But the three subtle minds. But perhaps we'll notice them down below. I don't believe they appeared above. But please notice whether both of them speak of them this way. These are the minds of vivid white appearance, vivid red or orange appearance, and vivid darkness. Now, I think vivid is fine. I think vivid's probably all right, at least for the first part of darkness, and then when it gets heavy and causes the inexperienced practitioner to swoon into what we normally would call unconsciousness, but of course there is still, what are the words I'm struggling for? The consciousness is there, but consciousness doesn't mean noticing. Unconsciousness, lack of awareness, you pass out. So even when you pass out, mind is still there. Do you follow the two meanings of the word consciousness? So you actually pass out. Why? Because you're not, as Mipam Gyatsho or Khetsun Sangpo says, you're not familiar. Familiar with what? With the fundamental mind. In other words, when you're introduced to the fundamental mind, when you're introduced to intrinsic awareness, You have to get used to it. You have to familiarize with it. And as Mipam Gyatsho says, that's meditation. What is Gomba? It's Komba. What is meditation? It's familiarization. So through that familiarization, as is also emphasized in the Dalai Lama's book, one becomes capable of, when the mind of black near attainment appears, of recognizing intrinsic awareness, which then brings about the recognition of the fundamental innate mind of clear light, and thus the clear light. The mind of dark near attainment disappearing, and the mind of clear light dawning. So, this word lur in Tibetan, this final syllable, which in whatever alphabet we call this, let's call it English, would be D. The spelling, if it has a, shall we say, a short tail, is na. If it has a long tail, it's da, D. So the person who's writing or carving, depending on how it's written or carved, if it has a long tail, it's lur. If it's a short tail, it's long. And in Gelugpa text or in Nyingma text or anybody's text, it can be read in these two different ways. And the word is different. It's very different. Lur and long. Lur means pollute. So these are the three pollutants. And if it's pollutant, it's moonlight, sunlight, and darkness that pollute pure sky, pure space. If it's long, then you've got to be clever to come up with three things that raise up or drive conceptuality. And as we were saying last time, the term conceptuality in its narrower meaning refers to everything except direct perception. All minds, that's too wide. Well, what we usually, I'll handle this in an easy way. Instead of going into the long discussion, what we usually think of as conceptuality, but there's a broader meaning, which is everything except the mind of clear light. All consciousnesses, even an I consciousness, which we usually usually call a non-conceptual consciousness. Even in this broader meaning of conceptual, it's included as conceptual. It's all the cruddy consciousnesses. So in terms of long, then what are the three conditions? And the note gives you the three conditions. It's a little bit difficult to explain them this way. When you read on below, you can see that Mipam Gyatsho is reading it as pollute. But in any case, the conditions that an observed object condition and immediately preceding condition and a proprietary condition, which is for a sense consciousness, it would be the subtle matter that allows you to see. The ear, it's the subtle matter that allows you to hear. Immediately preceding condition is a preceding moment of consciousness. It doesn't necessarily have to be for an eye consciousness a preceding moment of eye consciousness, because when you wake up, the eye consciousness wasn't operating. It can be a preceding moment of any consciousness, but you have to work a bit hard to read this as long, to raise up or drive. Anyway, when these conditions have totally dissolved, conceptuality can't get going. And thus it is like this space is like totally clear space, empty and open. You recognize your own entity, your own face, clear light, the inconceivable noumenon. So then back to Mipam Gyatsho. For ordinary persons without the conditioning of the path, this conditioning here doesn't mean those conditions, but the familiarization of the path. Even after the reversal of the 8 types of consciousness. So this is a system of 8 consciousnesses rather than the 6 of the consequent school in Gelugpa. This is the 8 that are brought over from, in Gelug would be the mind-only school, but the 8 consciousnesses, adding on the afflicted mind and the mind basis of all. So at the time of death, all of these collapse, and in thick sleep, really heavy sleep, they've all collapsed. Then the noumenal mind, the fundamental mind, could not possibly be reversed. Some mind has to be there. It's uncompounded and changing, so there's no way it can be non-existent. It's not going to collapse. But for an ordinary person who hasn't familiarized with the path, ordinary person who hasn't recognized mere awareness, fundamental mind, intrinsic awareness, hasn't gotten used to it, that person doesn't recognize, that uncompounded, unchanging fundamental mind. So that sort of a state that you're in is designated as a state of mindless darkness. When in the lumberyard, I've spoken before about a 6-inch and a long beam that had nails coming out, the pointed nails coming out of the side of it, because it had been attached to the wall of the freight car, fell and hit me on the head, but the nails those didn't stick into my head. They were out on the side. When that fell on my head and I fell, I was laughing because I remembered it just now. And I stumbled a bit. I actually was looking at my father, who was the boss of the company, who was talking to the buyer of the wood. And I was looking at those two when the thing fell and hit me on the head. And I walked a bit over, stumbled a bit over, and then fell under another freight car. And it was sort of just black. So, a state of mindless darkness. But actually, I was aware. So, when I opened my eyes again, I said, oh, I've been aware all along. And so everybody decided I was okay. But they hauled me off to the hospital and they did an x-ray of my head, and in the hospital, I was 20 years old, so that was 1960. They decided I was okay. But my mother kept me at home. For a while. I went back to work that day, but she was a bit more cautious. So it's a state of mindless darkness. So, you see, Sangpo says, if through a Lama is introducing you to the empty noumenon. His Holiness told a story about a student whose Lama had him bow down in the next room. See, I'm trying to think of a counterexample to through a Lama is introducing you to the empty noumenon. The counterexample is, do you have to have a Lama introduce you to it? So you see, the Lama had the student bow down in the next room. So the student was fed up with bowing down. And there's this thing where you have a bunch of boards that are, nailed. You have cross boards, and the boards are nailed together. So and you have things on your hands, and you bow down and you clap them against the thing and you stretch out. So the student actually wasn't bowing down. He was in the next room. So he would clap these things down on the board and pretend that he was bowing down. So at some point I don't know, I'll make up a little of the next part of it, but I do have the core of it. At some point later on, I believe it was later on, that's the part I'm making up, he remembered the kindness of his Lama for his teaching and patient teaching and so forth. And he was crying and crying and crying. And because of the crying, this extended crying, some sort of fundamental, some sort of insight into the fundamental mind appeared from crying. You see, the Lama didn't introduce him. Now you might try to make that up and say, well, the Lama had him bow down. The Lama was so patient teaching him, and that was his introduction. But that's just making up some excuse. That isn't some sort of, these events can do that. So I won't tell you about my event. All right. Introducing you to the empty noumenon. Yeah. Well, it was my mother just leaving me crying in the back hall. Crying and crying and crying. And eventually something gelled in the midst of all the crying. It's still vivid to me. You get abstracted from all the involvements of the consciousnesses. Into, it's not a state of grief. Not at all. Okay, anyway. So the empty noumenon, you have been able to... So if through a lama is introducing you to the empty noumenon, this is the pointing out, you see. And then you gain familiarity. You've been able to gain familiarity. Well, that means you got the pointing out, and then you sustain familiarity through meditation. And that means you use the third key, which is the dissolving of conceptuality through those, the three different ways. But those are not forced techniques. But you become used to letting go of conceptuality appearing and disappearing. You become used to it and staying with, sustaining this which you got a hold of, that you caught, or which, not that you, by its being pointed out. Then you gain familiarity with the effulgence of noumenal and intrinsic awareness. A lot of words for something that's simple. You can recognize fundamental mind when the 8 consciousnesses, collections of consciousness, disappear and cease. Even when you get hit over the head with a huge 6x6, which I didn't. And right with recognition, you gain the steadfastness of release. The steadfastness is what did you say last time? The fortress. You're in the fortress. Nothing can get at you. You see, that's the steadfastness. The fortress of release. That's why people build fortresses. Because nobody's got a bazooka or, well, that dates me.
Yeah.
You can recognize fundamental mind when those are, and right with recognition, you gain you gain release, you gain what's the word nowadays? We tend to feel there's no escape. What's a word nowadays for the safety of release, the sanctuary of release, right? That not even Trump can get at. Right? But sanctuary, it's good. Yeah. Excuse the joke. But that not even the government can get at. It's a true sanctuary. The true sanctuary of release. However, in the case of an ordinary person who does not have the training, so you see, of gaining familiarity. See, this is very important, the familiarity. Unless you're somebody who, the very rare person who goes all the way to Buddhahood at one moment. Who, when you sit down, you're an ordinary person, and when you rise, you're either, possibly at the path of seeing, or you go all the way to Buddhahood. They're extremely rare. with such meditation. You're gaining familiarity through such meditation. But it's influence. But if you're somebody who is influenced only by earlier conceptuality of the usual type, but you can see where, if you get this pointing out, and you get some foothold, then you need to train. And thus, if your influence, if you're stuck, if you're influenced only by earlier conceptuality of the usual type, and thus you're subject to mistake, the true mistake, then at the time of death or at the time of deep sleep of thick darkness, when the eight collections of consciousness disappear, and this, you get hit over the head or whatever, which is, like being deep sleep. The mind of reality is not recognized. And you're like, duh. And you're lost in utter darkness. And when you wake up, you say, I had a really good sleep. I didn't remember anything. I had one of those last night. As if totally mindless. Wow, it's great. Yeah. A real rest. I was proud of it. Since there is no more than that, this is called a state of mindless darkness. Oh, it was really great. I suppose that's what, when they, in the movies, when they send somebody out to outer space, when they wake you up and say, oh yeah, you spent 40 years in mindless darkness. And they're probably going to fix it so that we can get as much mindless darkness as we want. However, it is not that the noumenal clear light is non-existent during that period. Why not? It has, we'll skip this, right? Fundamental mind is, although fundamental mind is uncompounded and immutable, wow, it's really, wow, when you think about that, it's right there. It has just not been identified due to lack of familiarity from meditation. And then notice how it's announced, right? He's announcing it. But I found it really helpful to slip in the heading that he's slips topic, right? He's shifting topic. It's both helpful and it needs to be noticed how smoothly he moves to the path of method. He's not saying, now I'm going to go over to the crappy path of method. No, he lovingly introduces the path of method. That you see, this may not be the unique path of the great completeness, but it is a branch of the path of great completeness. And if you see his layout of the path of method, you see how somebody practicing the path of release would easily use techniques from the path of method. And as one of my friends who is a scholar of the great completeness said, the Nyingmas use sexual yoga and so forth a great deal. He felt, actually out of ignorance, that Nyingmas use the sexual yoga of the Guhya Samaja much more than Gelupas use it. He just didn't know Gelupa. So, this sort of, what I'm trying to point out here is those who see, if I haven't made the point enough by now, those who see the great completeness as, oh, we're the path of release, and Gelupa is just the path of method, is just ridiculous. Although the great completeness has a path of release that Gelupa doesn't have. I mean, that's the claim. I mean, it's not just a claim, that's what they're saying. And that's fine. In order to manifest the mind of clear light through the path of method. Now, I'm trying to watch, is this the same mind of clear light? Are there two paths to the same mind of clear light? Now, this is not talking about the mind of clear light as it is described in Gelupa. This is the mind of clear light through the path of method as described in Nyingma, which is, according to Nyingma, a better description than the one described in Gelug, because Gelug describes it in terms of object and subject, yes. Yogis, having previously practiced the generation stage, Vajra repetition. Vajra repetition is, to put it very briefly, the practice of in-breathing Om when the in-breathing is Om, holding it at the, I believe it's just at the heart, but it's probably, I'm not sure about it, it's just at the heart. For the same length as Ah, and exhaling for the same length as Hum. That's extremely brief. And it's not said out loud. It's the breath only is heard this way. And so forth. You could read Dan Kozort's book, Highest Yoga Tantra, which is based on, which is, not just based on, which is the class, which is a condensation of the class done at the University of Virginia many years ago. And we hope to do the full translation as a Uma Institute project of the text and of John Bell Shenpen's commentary, oral commentary, and so forth. In the completion stage, yogis hold the mind on a subtle drop at the heart. Not necessarily at the heart, but anyway, the heart is the most, the deepest place to do it, and also the most dangerous. Whereupon they experience images of mirages and so forth. Now, if you remember, there are 8. This topic is taught often in the context of the 8 stages of dying, of the dissolution of the elements at death, but death is merely an example of the dissolution that occurs when sneezing, what is it? Sneezing, dying, sneezing,
Fainting.
Fainting, right.
Orgasm.
Orgasm. Deep meditation, certain types of deep meditation.
Falling asleep.
Falling asleep, ending a dream. And then in reverse order, they usually don't say ending a sneeze. Usually that doesn't, and I joke that we could start a new cult of throwing pepper around and sneezing. Making everybody sneeze. Usually people do the cults around having sex. And I suppose the cults say, well, sorry, we didn't manage to have the subtle minds today. But at least we had fun having sex. Or, you could bop people over the head. You'd have to really get skilled in it. So, you didn't totally pass out. I don't know how you do it. Okay. But of course, anyway, enough for jokes, huh? But you see, we're passing through these. So, the experience of mirage, smoke, is it mirage?
Yeah.
Smoke, fireflies. It said within the smoke. Is it always within the smoke? I would challenge that. Sometimes you see fireflies. They don't have to be within smoke. Mirage, smoke, fireflies, and then flame, first flickering, then steady. But that's all within number 4. And then the mind of, the white, the moonlight, sunlight, darkness, and mind of clear light. Those 8. Now, So Sangpo says, he refers to the Guru Sumatra Tantra. What are the methods? They practice generation stage arrangement. They imagine themselves as instantaneously appearing. Well, of course, you have to gradually appear. First, gradually appear as your favorite deity, and then eventually you get so used to it that you can appear, instantaneously as your favorite deity, the one you've chosen. Just as when you get used to the map of your going to whatever place, you can, the whole thing will appear like that. And then they practice a type of intensive mantra repetition. Which involves holding and lengthening the breath, right? So these three are equal. Inhalation, holding, exhalation. Do you inhale the same length as you hold? And exhale the same length as you inhaled and held? It's hardly. It's quite different. And then, of course, when you train, but that in the Vajra repetition, those three are equal. But then there are other meditations in which you hold for a long time. Anyway, blah blah. Having done these practices, then the completion stage was a particular emphasis on the channel winds and drops, meditating on their empty mode of abiding. They hold the mind in a very subtle object of observation, a tiny drop at the heart, blah blah blah. We already covered it. We covered it, so to speak. It's a study in itself. The drop is extremely small. Well, you don't have to start with it this small, like a hair. Give me a break. And has a triple winding, symbolizing the three subtle minds. You see. You see, it's passed from these two readings to only this reading of pollutants, the three subtle minds, of white appearance, red or orange, increase of appearance, and black near attainment. When they hold their mind on that subtle, tiny drop, there are many external visions of illusionary appearances. Now this is interesting, such as mirages, dreams, and so forth. Now notice, here we are with Mipam. On the occasion of the three phases of appearance, increase of appearance, and near attainment, right? So these are the four after the first four. You see, Mipam up above said images of mirages and so forth. Those four are mirage, smoke, fireflies, and flame, like flame of a butter lamp. First fluttering, then steady. These are of the winds coming down. And now here are the words Garlam, Marlam, Naklam. As I was reading it earlier, I wondered if anybody translates Lam as path. White path. It's sort of funny. I'm laughing, mean, I might have translated it that way myself if I didn't have lamas to teach me what lam means. Lam is the onomatopoeia. You know, it's white, vivid, you know, galam, galamba, marlamba, naklamba. And as I've said before, it's not whitish, reddish, blackish, because ish just means, whitish could mean kind of white, kind of red, kind of black. You know, like not quite black. This is super black, super red, super white. You know, but super red means like sun. Is the sun red? You know, red or orange, but you see, sun is better. The sun image is better than red or orange. So super white, super is super. Soup white. Soup. S-U-P. Soup white. That's better than anything I've ever had. Because I've never had anything really good. Soup white. Soup red. Soup black. Have you got another one? Better one? But you get the point. The end of which a visionary experience like a, you know, visionary? Anyway, like a cloudless sky. Nyam. Nyam. Boy, nyam. You know, it's a spiritual experience, a visionary experience. Anyway, yogic experience. So, it becomes increasingly intense, as Khetsun says, like a vast sky pervaded by reddish. Oh my God, there's the ish. Soup red. S-U-P, not S-O-U-P. Hardly able in the middle there to remain conscious. Conscious, right? Conscious isn't bad. At this point, ordinary beings lose consciousness. Lose, did we have a word earlier? Lose. Consciousness isn't bad. But highly developed yogis, though they experience the onset of darkness, that's good, it's nice, the onset of darkness. Due to prior, karma, due to prior familiarization, immediately actualize. How interesting. The mind of clear light, even for long periods. You see how vividly the path of method is described, even for long periods. What they experience at this point is like a cloudless sky. It doesn't sound very thrilling, does it? But it is. You expect 48 organs to be, 48 symphonies to be blasting. Since at that time mentality Now that was identified as the mental consciousness, has not ceased. Now this is what's interesting. Now you would have thought, now we're trying to find out if you're getting down to the fundamental, foundational mind. But now he's saying this is not the actual foundational clear light, but it's just partially similar in aspect to it. But up above, he said, he's going to describe the clear light, how it's actualized.
It made me wonder if he was kind of, because I caught, when I was reading it, I caught that too. Like the subtle mentality was like an inference of emptiness or something like that, and not the actual clear light.
Yeah, I mean, this is clear light, but it's not an inference, but it's not quite there, and so, but then he's going to say, you see down in the next one, by familiarizing with it again and again, Mipam-gyatsho, it eventually becomes the realizational, actual clear light. Tokpa tenki yourself. Now, but still, so let's leave it as, you see, I think, see now in the next section down below, the reference is back up to the visionary experience, the nyam. So my guess is these are two paths to the deepest. But let's just play with that. So I'll make the statement, these are two paths to the deepest. And we'll see if I'm wrong. So this is our workshop. And as opposed to, we've got a couple classes up on the web where I'm more firm in what I'm lecturing on. But we're calling these sessions as opposed to, very carefully laid out lectures. Even if there's some, where my understanding is more developed, if not, certainly not perfect, never is, still swimming about. So anyway, that's it for today. Yes?
Oh, okay. This is a question about the comparison of the Gaelic version of what dawns, because it sounds here like the fundamental clear light is deliberately induced by the yogi at the time of darkness in this system. And I'm asking is, in the Gaelic system, is it deliberately induced or does it dawn naturally in the way we're taught it?
Oh, I think it's the same in that through familiarity, through setting it up, through the familiarity, through meditation, the fundamental innate mind of clear light will dawn. But what Nyingma is saying is that the description that Gelu gives the fundamental innate mind of clear light as an impermanent consciousness indicates that it is not the foundational intrinsic awareness. Whereas I think Gelug could answer that the metaphor of water and water indicates that it is, and that Gelug chooses to use the vocabulary of subject and object so that it can make use of object, the language of object and subject, to have the advantages of that discussion in its presentation. I suppose Nyingma could answer, well, that's just the point. Since you feel at home with that discussion, that indicates you haven't gotten at it. You know, and then go on, you know, they'll go on forever back and forth on that issue. So, you know, and I guess I would say, let's try and figure out what the value is of looking at it each way, or I want to look at the value of it each way, and see where that leads me, rather than try to come to a decision this way or that way. See that there's a different conceptual framework and try to mine the value of the different conceptual framework to stimulate me to go deeper than I am.